Thank you all for joining us. Today's event is titled Next-Gen Success Equals Harvard Success. Members of the Harvard Next-Gen Initiative will talk about their Harvard Culture Lab Innovation Fund pilot program, which consolidates, aligns, and enhances Harvard's institutional supports for next-gen student populations, predominantly first-gen low-income students, in and beyond the classroom. Our session will present an overview of the next-gen student population, pedagogical tools that promote next-gen student success, and how each one of us plays a role in strengthening Harvard's commitment to inclusive excellence. We're joined by four panelists today. Shandra Jones is the NGI Curriculum Development Lead and a doctoral candidate concentrating in human development, learning, and teaching at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Chandra's research focuses on how adolescent and young adult cultural and psychological assets support post-secondary student success in the face of structural, systemic, and contextual barriers. Shandra has over 10 years of experience in public, nonprofit, and private sectors, along with a consistent record of community engagement. In higher education, Shandra has led everything from recruiting strategy to diversity and inclusion efforts for domestic and global student populations. Born and raised in Pritchard, Alabama, Shandra is a first-generation student, or as she calls herself, first-generation everything. Also with us today are two NGI Curriculum Development Fellows. Becca Bassett is a doctoral candidate in education at Harvard with a concentration in culture, institutions, and society. Her research combines a socio-cultural and organizational approach to explore how American universities can design and implement programmatic, academic, and organizational changes to ensure first-generation, low-income students not only reach, but complete college. Alongside her academic work, Becca leads the Freedom Project College Success Program, which supports 23 Freedom Fellow alumni attending college to ensure that they graduate and achieve their post-secondary goals. With Shandra and Becca is Danny Rojas, an NGI Curriculum Development Fellow and doctoral candidate in education leadership at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. The son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic, Danny completed his undergraduate studies at Northeastern University and later served as both classroom teacher and district-level leader in the Houston Independent School District. Danny has served as founding member at several nonprofit organizations serving students from first-generation and low-income backgrounds. Danny is currently pursuing his superintendent license, and his work focuses on strategically bridging the gaps between K-12 and higher education. And our session today is chaired by Amanda Sharick, PhD, the project lead for Next-Gen Initiative and senior program manager for the Harvard Graduate Commons Program. Amanda, whose screen is currently opaque, but will be joining us certainly audibly and preferably visually as well. Amanda is in this role in overseeing academic and career development initiatives and is a dedicated programming team to support students with children. Amanda's professional commitments to building inclusive living learning communities are rooted in her personal experience as a first-generation college student and as the daughter of a Mexican immigrant. In her free time, Amanda serves as an academic advisor for the board of first-year advisors at Harvard College and pursues her research interests in memory studies, British and American literature, immigrant and migrant literature, and Jewish studies. Without further ado, let's learn more about next-gen success equals Harvard success. Amanda, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thank you everyone for being here. It is my pleasure to get a chance to speak with all of you today and introduce our team. This is, as he mentioned, the Next-Gen VPAL signature event. Next-Gen Success is Harvard Success. And my name is Amanda Sharick. Today's structure of today's conversation, and we hope it feels more like a conversation than a presentation, will include a very brief overview of the Next-Gen initiative, followed by a panel discussion with prepared questions for my incredible colleagues, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. And then we'll walk through some of our faculty resource development efforts before we take your questions for the final 20 minutes. All right, so what is Next-Gen? Well, Next-Gen is a Culture Lab Innovation Fund recipient for the 2020-21 academic year. We started as a 2019 pilot within the Graduate Commons program, and we have an initiative with multiple verticals where we focus on students, staff, and faculty engagement around first-gen, next-gen communities. So what we're really thinking about is, again, aligning and consolidating and enhancing existing institutional supports and community building pathways for the Harvard undergraduate and graduate students who are the first in their families to pursue a degree in the US or from under-resourced or underserved backgrounds. We utilize a One Harvard multi-directional cross-divisional approach to create diverse team of faculty, staff, and students who are working to align Harvard's top-down commitments to equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the local school-specific bottom-up efforts to sustain local first-generation, next-gen student communities. We also utilize tech as part of a way to engage and reduce structural barriers to access and awareness of institutional resources that are critical to success for first-generation and lower-income students. And then more critically, I think, is this term next gen. And really, as part of that alignment efforts, as part of this asset-based framework that we're trying to implement, we're bringing in a new nomenclature of next gen that really recognizes the skill sets of our first-gen students, of our lower income, undocumented, documented, TPS, and students from mixed status households, to really emphasize that what they are bringing to Harvard are the new metrics for what it means to be a 21st century college student and 21st century leader. And over the last 3 months of our pilot, we found that Harvard has all the resources that it needs to do this work well and to do this work in ways that support next-gen students at all levels. And we've been moved by the work that's being done currently, and that people are championing, that staff and faculty and students are championing all over campus, and who believe that this work is important. Yet throughout our listening tours, we've learned that the lack of centralized effort to align the how and the why of this support work and the basic mechanisms to support our champions on campus around best practices and resources continues to be a major barrier at every level. So today we'll be focusing a bit on those topics of why and how. And I'm thrilled to be joined this afternoon by 3 members of our Next-Gen faculty development team, whose work focuses squarely on the institutional support and enrichment of faculty resources and skills for inclusive teaching and support services. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves and in alphabetical order. Becca Bassett.
Hi all, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Becca Bassett, and I am a PhD candidate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And my research focus is squarely on this topic. So I focus on how can institutions change their cultures, their structures, and their practices to better support and serve their first generation low-income students, and ultimately reduce graduation gaps between those students and their higher income continuing generation peers. I'm also a practitioner, and so I run a college success program that supports an amazing group of young artists, entrepreneurs, Black feminists, and computer scientists as they pursue their dreams in college.
Thank you, Becca. Shandra Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shandra Jones, and I'm thrilled to be here with the team and with you. I am a 4th-year PhD candidate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and my research focuses on the cultural and psychological assets that young people bring with them into the end of secondary education and into post-secondary ed, so into higher education, and how that really supports their success in and through post-secondary education. And I really focus on ethnic racial identity development and other forms of identity assets that support those students. And so that means that I spend a lot of time thinking about students and the student experience, what we understand from a developmental framework, and how that matches and meets the institutional responsibilities and my background in strategy and change management within educational context, so that we can really activate around what we understand about our students. So thank you.
Thank you, Shandra. And Danny Rojas.
Hello, everyone. Danny Rojas, originally from Central Falls, Rhode Island. I am a second-year doctoral student in education leadership, EDLD program at the Ed School. And my work has focused on really thinking critically around what are the supports that first-generation students from underserved backgrounds really need in order to succeed, not only get to college, but succeed. There's a lot of talk around whether college is for everyone. And I truly believe that as a nation, we cannot answer that question until we know for sure that every student is actually prepared to make that decision when it comes time to apply. And so that's what a lot of my work has been, more so on the practice side.
Thank you, Danny. So now let's get into this conversation. People are here to hear what we have to share about who Nextgen is. What does the research tell us nationally at Harvard? What are their needs? And what does this mean for teaching, advising, and support mechanisms at Harvard? So I'm going to toss to Becca first and think about, what do we know about first-gen lower income students, Nextgen student experience generally?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Amanda. And I know that my panelists would also have a lot to add here. But first, we know that because of the way that educational opportunity is distributed unequally across the United States, that Nextgen students arrive at college already having persevered through many challenges and challenging life circumstances and bring tremendous strengths, important life perspectives, and visions for a more equitable future with them to college. And yet, researchers like myself document again and again that when they arrive at college, they are often undervalued and undersupported by the institutions that they attend. So what does this look like? Well, structurally, scholars like Dean Terry Long and Sarah Goldrick-Rab show that the costs of college have risen exponentially, but state and federal financial aid have not kept apace, which leaves our lowest income students making untenable trade-offs between working 20, 30, 40 hours a week to afford college. So not only are students more likely to work more per week, but they're also less likely to live on campus, which are two factors that we know influence retention for all college students. And while there are often hidden pockets of well-resourced pathways on campus, these are often small or exclusive programs like honors programs or very small scholarship programs that are either hard to find or and often found first by the parents of continuing generation higher income students, or that they could be a great program for low income first generation students, but it serves only a fraction of the total eligible students on campus. So many first generation low income students, in fact, most of them are in college, but with no kind of clear institutional support program that's surrounding and supporting them. We also see that first generation low income students often experience social marginalization on campus, not because of anything to do with them, but because campus social scenes are always typically dominated by the highest status students. And colleges actually help that. They are often trying to attract full tuition paying students and high status students. And so cultivate a social scene that fits those students' desires and tastes, which can feel really marginalizing and isolating if you can't fit into that scene or are kind of clearly told that you don't. This is kind of similar really with extracurricular engagement, right? We know that extracurricular engagement is a tremendously important part of college, but it's actually not accessible to all students. Lots of extracurricular opportunities require certain forms of cultural capital, economic capital, or social capital to actually take advantage and benefit from. And so students also kind of find themselves cut out of opportunities that they hear people saying, oh, you should really do this. This is really going to help your success, which is kind of a painful irony. And then when we look at classroom spaces, so low-income first-generation students often experience family socialization that kind of coaches them to approach authority figures and teachers with a deference attitude, to take responsibility for personal actions, to show respect, and to work independently. rather than trying to kind of get as many resources as they can. And these strategies are highly valued in their families, but don't earn the same assistance, accommodations, or attention that the strategies that middle class and upper class students engage. So they're often coached to be very resourceful, to avoid consequences for missteps, and to be very proactive in voicing their concerns. And so we see that in college, first generation low income students are often laboring independently, less likely to ask for grade changes or help from their TAs, and that this has real impact for the grades that they get, but also their ability to kind of decode the hidden curriculum of academia as they go through it. Lastly, I'll just add that in my own research, I found that relationships with faculty and staff can serve as powerful bridges and mediators of these institutional environments that are thwarting the success of low-income first-gen students. But these relationships, like those in our own life, don't just magically appear or form. They require consistent meeting. They require inclusive stances from staff and faculty, and really conveying an interest in students as full people, not just as a number who's going to be turning in an essay later in the week. But when first generation low-income students do form these trusting relationships with staff and faculty members, they create really important non-judgmental spaces for low-income first-gen students to disclose their challenges, receive feedback on their potential solutions, and kind of test out and discuss what should they do next, which again is a resource that continuing generation higher income students are often getting directly from their families. So there's a lot of things that institutions can do to actually foster that relationship building, but it often isn't a priority of institutional of actors, especially on the academic sides of institutions. Although we're seeing, some more change in that in the first year as universities create some more embedded supports in first year programs, which we think are really a good practice for supporting the next gen students.
Thank you, Becca. Yes, there's so much to unpack there, and so many great, actionable, promising interventions that you mentioned, and we try to capture them on that slide. You can see more about this as we'll discuss later in the section, but also on our website. So there's a lot of information about next-gen students and what we know about them, but how that translates into best practices. What are some of the insights for teaching and advising for student equity and success that we can actually think about today, that we can use to launch a conversation around. And I'm going to toss to Danny.
Thank you, Amanda. And in what Becca elevated, you can see the complexity that students have to navigate. So higher ed systems are very complex, especially if you are a student who has no relative or immediate family that can help you understand and unpack what that experience is like. And so there are a series of small actions that can make a dramatic impact in the experience of first generation students on a college campus. One of the things that I'll elevate is demystifying office hours. So this past summer, I helped to design a fully virtual college transition program for first generation college students. And one of the most popular sessions was a panel that we had that brought in faculty and staff from different universities across the Massachusetts area. And students really did not understand, like, why would I go and and speak to my teacher? Like, I have to figure this out. I have all the answers. And so it was super important. After that conversation, students recognize, wow, you don't just go to a professor just when you need help. Building that relationship can actually help me in the future. It could help me, if a internship opportunity in the summer comes across my professor's desk. If I've had conversations and they understand what my passions are, I might be one of the first people they think about to extend that opportunity. And so these kind of things, it seems like small actions, but helping students understand, like, why should you come to me for office hours? And they were also shocked to understand that professors wanted them there. They wanted them to take advantage of the spaces to connect with them. Other things that come out of the Center of Teaching at Vanderbilt include just transparency in the classroom, explicitly teaching study skills, organizing study groups. Many faculty members assume that can happen organically. And although it can in some spaces, depending on the culture and the environment that has set up in the school, some students don't understand what the value of that is. That could be a scary process to approach a group of students that in their minds know what they're doing and know what they're talking about. And then here you are lost and unsure. How do you engage in that dynamic? So if it's explicitly an expectation of the course, that becomes a little bit of a different experience for the student. Also really leveraging rubrics and going over those. And then the last thing, just modeling discussions. So one of the things that as I transitioned from public school to private school in high school, and we had Harkness discussions. So I had an understanding of how to engage in those conversations. But a lot of my peers, when I was, in my first year of college, did not. They didn't understand how to engage in discourse in a debate in an academic setting. So some of the modeling is super, super helpful for students. And the key thing here is it doesn't only help first-gen students. It actually can be super helpful for your entire class to understand what your expectations are and how you hope that they would engage in the learning and create their own learning.
Thanks, Danny. That's really helpful to think about, hey, what are the best practices? How does this help, our first gen, next gen students thrive? How does it ensure that a community of students thrives in a classroom more generally? But some people might, balk at the idea that we even need this at Harvard, right? We don't need the supports where our students are the best of the best and they complete at their degrees at 97% within 4 years. So why should we really kind of make this shift in our classrooms, on our campuses? And I'm going to ask Shandra Jones for that hard-hitting question.
It's such a good question. And the reality is that, yes, our students are incredible. They're amazing. And we are so excited and thrilled to have them on campus. But the reality is that at any given moment, we have somewhere around 15 to 20% of our student population who self-identifies with one of the communities that fall under the first gen low income, or what we call next gen student moniker. And so that means that at any point we have approximately a fifth of our students on campus who might arrive with varying levels of these resources and pre-existing knowledge about how to navigate a space like Harvard, and frankly, a space like any of the elite institutions. But since we'll focus here at Harvard, I think we can't assume that all students come prepared to navigate all of the mysterious menus that exist in Harvard life and know how to decode that. And furthermore, I think we have to recognize that it's not only the student's responsibility to get up to speed on those secret menus, but that we as institutions and as actors and stakeholders within that institution play a role, because ultimately those students will spend time with us, and they'll spend time with us in our classes, whether we are the faculty or instructor, or we're teaching team members, as many of us as grad students are, or they're in our offices if we are support staff, or if you're in residential life. At any given point, you're connecting with students. And it's those experiences, as Becca described, and as Danny put the punctuation mark on, that really students use to construct their sense of satisfaction with the institution. They use that to construct their sense of belonging and inclusion within that institution. And then we know through the research that those are mediators that can either promote academic engagement and success, or they can inhibit. And that means to me then that we as individual actors, stakeholders in the institution, are either promoting academic engagement and success with our students, or we're inhibiting. And so, and when we think about the fact that our students come from such diverse backgrounds, even those students, as Tony Jack mentions, what you might think is one monolithic label, we can take the Next Gen moniker as a perfect example. It's one label, but within that are so many communities. And the reality is that a student who may be facing challenges with immigration status may have different needs and considerations than a student who may be coming from a lower income, maybe rural background that's US based. And we need to be thinking about what that means. As Danny said, attending to those needs means attending to the success of all of our students, regardless of their background. And it really makes me think about examples, right, in our work with students. We hear stories all the time from our first gen students who come to us and are struggling in class, but we have to convince them to go to office hours. And we say, well, you know you're struggling, and the TFs and the professors have made themselves available through these mechanisms, office hours, problem set nights, fill in the blank. But for many of the students I hear time and again who come from a first gen low income background or next gen background, they say, I'm afraid to go because I feel that will give me the appearance of having been unprepared, of not being prepared for this class. And so then we have a conversation about, well, these mechanisms are there because we know you're going to need help, but there's this stigma around it. And knowing that our students face some of those potential interpretations of their actions on campus, I think it's important to recognize that there are actual things that we can do to demystify what it means to come to office hours. What does it mean to go to the problem set night? And as Becca mentioned, the fact that students actually carry different responsibilities with them on campus. Some are working, some are working because it's part of their aid package, some are helping family back home. That was my story. I was an undergraduate student at Stanford and was, as I said, I'm first gen everything. And I worked 2 and 3 jobs at any one time. And I was not only taking care of my out-of-pocket expenses that weren't covered through my aid package, but I was helping family at home as well and keeping grades. And that's fine for me, but that also meant a trade-off between time spent away from career opportunities and networking and relationship building that we, I think, can think about ourselves as instructors, but also as staff members. So I think it's a great question. The reality is that even at elite institutions where our completion rates are incredibly high, that the experience of thriving and inclusion is important. And I think the slide that Amanda is showing on the screen now represents some of the next gen needs that are specific to Harvard that we can be aware of. Things like, do we have the actual staffing support, the continuity of the residential support across houses, because we do have a decentralized housing management system, but centralizing things like awareness of resources and structures that students have available to them. We can think about that for our undergraduate students, but then we also need to be thinking about our graduate students who may have other needs as first-gen students around tailored resources for programming and community building opportunities. So ultimately, when the case for why this matters at Harvard, it's a case not only about inclusion and belonging while you're a student, but I also think coming and wearing my administrator hat, because I do bring so many years in that role, I think about what this means when these students graduate. How likely are they to be engaged alumni? How likely are they to be not only engaged in their acts, but also in kind, in their giving, in their likelihood of referring other people to the institution? And we have to think really life cycle when we think about what it means to be attending to inclusion in the classroom, because we're not just actually talking about the classroom, we're talking about their life cycle from matriculation through alumni status.
That's so important and so clearly frames the stakes of the why, that this is about Harvard becoming a leader in inclusive excellence, that this is about the thriving of our students and flourishing at every level, not just the undergraduate, but also through their next steps of post-graduation life, their graduate school life, their professional degrees, and the type of ways in which Harvard can invest in its first generation students, its lower income students, its next gen students, so that they are the next generation of leaders. So we have a clear sense of why. How do we now kind of move to the how piece? Like, I know we have some resources to share, but when we think about what a faculty member can do. Like now we set this up, we have to do this work. Where do we even start? It kind of feels a little daunting. If I make a mistake, am I now impacting future giving, et cetera? Like all these things. I hope people think like, I'm impacting their outcomes and community. But where do we even start? I mean, let's kind of think through what you might recommend.
Yeah, I can jump in there and start with the classroom. So in terms of teaching, the first thing is to, especially if you are a first year instructor or if you are having lots of first years in your class, is to proactively build relationships with those students, to not place the burden on building relationships and the onus of that onto students wholly. Sure, there is some give and take, but at least in our first and second years of college, we need to be scaffolding, just like we would teach any other skill, scaffolding the relationship building skill. So how do we do that? One is that you can just require all students to come into office hours at least once a semester, or meet with your TA at least once a semester. I highly recommend that you have required meetings with students after the first assignment. Why? Just to kind of debrief. How did that assignment go? How did you approach it? What can I make clear about the assignment that would have made it easier for you? So, and I think what's really key there is when you're building those relationships is to try to catch yourself from putting any judgment on student actions, because it's not fair to judge students when they are just novices in being college students, right? And I think in academia, we do a lot of judging, right? We become professionals at judgment. We judge scholarship and studies and the validity of our data. And so we're drawing lots of conclusions quickly. But it's really important to step back and say, hey, if no one's ever actually explicitly told that this is an important thing to do, here, let me tell you that and let me explain it. And just asking open-ended questions. Tell me about your goals for being in college. Tell me about what drives you, what changes you want to see. What has this class made you think differently about? But these kind of questions will elicit some really interesting conversations between you and your students will probably for the first time say, oh my gosh, he or she is a real person. They have a real life too. And so that's important to also share not everything about yourself, of course, but share why you came to college, what dreams, how many times you changed your major, what class fundamentally altered the way that you were thinking as a student, and even better, share a couple mistakes that you made along the way. As professors at Harvard, you are highly intimidating and highly accomplished people. And so it's important to also humanize yourself and acknowledge that you've also made some mistakes, because that will make it okay for students to feel like they can make mistakes in your classroom. Two other quick suggestions. One is explicitly state what it takes to succeed in your classroom. So if you have a vision in your head of what excellent participation looks like, and that's what gets your 100% when you grade student participation, explicitly state that. Even down to how often you expect students to be participating in classroom, and what does participating in classroom mean? Because some students might think that listening attentively and taking notes is participation, but you may not be counting that as participation. So being very explicit about how you define success in your classroom and how you're assessing their success and mastery. And that goes down to not just ambiguous things like participation, but very concrete things like an essay. I think I've met lots of professors over my lifetime, and I think lots of them, almost every one of them, might have a different definition of what an excellent essay is. And so it's really important to probe, do I articulate how, not only what success on this assignment looks like, but then how I expect you to complete it. If you're expecting students to meet with a research librarian, make that a required part of the assignment. Because if you don't state that, then the students who have a network that they can tap into and ask questions like, hey, I've got a big research paper coming up. What should my first step be, Mom? They are going to get coached through that. not because they're brighter, not because they're, better writers, but because they have at their, within a phone call's reach, a network who can coach them through the process. And one tiny last one is just feedback, feedback, feedback. All of your students want to succeed in your classroom, but often kind of don't know how to. They don't know where they fell short on an assignment. So if all they see is an 8 out of 10, they may not be sure how to get to 10 out of 10 until you explain, hey, that thesis statement, far too general. Or, I don't want these fluffy intro and conclusion paragraphs, or whatever it is. So the earlier you can give feedback and the more consistently you can give feedback to students, the more that you're helping students visualize, okay, this is what a good essay looks like. And here are the steps I need to take my 8 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10.
I love that. Thank you, Becca. I think one of my, I double tap on everything that Becca has shared. One thing I want to add is fighting invisibility as a teacher, as a mentor, as an advisor. Specifically when we're talking about faculty and syllabus, making sure that there are examples of represented of first gen, of educators of color, of philosophers of color. Like diversifying that is going to help students not feel like, I can't even see myself in this. I'll give you an example. I as a first next gen student myself, I was in a classroom and I scanned, the class itself was an elective, but it was one that I was very intrigued by. When I scanned this syllabus and I noticed that one of the readings, which was a mandatory reading, reflected an identity that I care about deeply, which is my association with a historically Black fraternity, that and how they were helpful in promoting college and career readiness in the communities that they serve. Immediately, first of all, I was shocked because I didn't realize that something so personal can be leveraged in a classroom, an academic setting. I became extremely interested in the course, even more so than I was before. Immediately took some time to thank the professor. It just meant something different, and it fundamentally transformed my experience and my investment in that course in a way that I had no idea. And here I am, a doctoral student, but those kind of things still impact us today. And so I think fighting invisibility is so important when you have the power to do so.
I think ultimately what we're recognizing through our research, through our experiential data that we bring into this, and through the listening tours that we've done with folks here at Harvard, is that there's an opportunity, there's a need, and there's a desire, frankly, to take the steps necessary to bring these insights that largely live in this kind of third person, right? We read about them, we highlighted something, we annotated, we made some notes, and then we walked away from it, and we didn't really incorporate that into our practice, into our pedagogy, as we like to talk about at the Ed School. And so we recognized that there was an opportunity to take this out of this third person thing that we read about into a first person practice. And so we spent a lot of time on our team, you see on the screen, doing just that, thinking, how do we help faculty and instructors do just that, bring these insights that we've all read about into their actual practice on a day-to-day basis and make it less daunting, break it down into action steps, because we know we see examples around campus of great success. We see HBS put their attention to transparency and tracking of participation. We see members of the faculty like Mandy Savitz-Romer, who takes real attention to diversifying her syllabi for her courses. And I can name other examples. We know that resources like Teachly exist that allow you to bring student information into your engagement practices in class, but they're all over the place. And how do you find those? How do you do that in a way that's time efficient and focus efficient, especially given the world we're living in now in COVID, when we're all screens in a little box, our box on a screen. So what Amanda is showing on the screen now are a number of what we call digital toolkits or digital handouts that this team has created to take those insights that we've just named out loud and put them in your hands in a way that you can refer back to and that break them down into bite-sized nuggets. So as Becca was saying, think about how you're going to offer that feedback. Be explicit about the markers of excellence in your course and what does it mean to take step one for that research project? What does it mean when I say I'm going to be tracking engagement, to name that? Those handouts give you very explicit things you can do, some immediately, some within 15 minutes of a day. Some you might work on over the course of a semester. So you're seeing the teaching one there on screen. We also, on the next slide, have examples for what Danny mentioned, the fight invisibility. We have a second handout that focuses on the advising and mentoring and how to bring inclusive practices to your advising and mentoring engagements with students. And again, these practices are identified through the literature on first-gen low-income student success, but we fully recognize that these are practices that serve all students, very much in alignment with the kind of universal design for learning approach that we take when we think about students with disabilities, and then recognizing that thinking about accessibility serves all students. That's very much the case here as well. So we've got some tips for mentoring and advising in the second handout, and there's a third handout that is we call it the do this now, which pulls from all of the different tips on teaching, advising, mentoring, and says, okay, how would you do this through the course of a semester? When the semester is about to start and you're thinking about your spring course, what do you do? What can you start to do? What are the conversations you could prepare for with your teaching team, with your teaching fellows? What are the types of resources you can set up so that you can gather that feedback early and often, as Becca mentioned? We'll take you through steps in that third handout there, and we highly not only recommend the handouts, we also hope that you all have our feedback through the feedback link that's on our site. But for me, I think about the tips that the team has just offered. I think about that question of, this feels daunting. What do I do now? And we say, take one step. Pick one and take that first action. Define your office hours. Set them if that's the one you want to take. Or if you want to try the thinking about your syllabus and looking at who's represented on it, pick one and start there.
Thank you so much, Shandra. And that's really our call to everybody, whether you're in the classroom, whether you're, serving your student-facing staff position. If there are staff in the audience who have more questions, Becca has a great article coming out on staff support and when students actually access resources. But the real focus here is that we knew going into COVID, our Cliff Grant technically started in September. We got to work in June. Shandra and team were kind of quickly doing these listening tours, reaching out to student organizations, reaching out to staff members to make sure that we were kind of redirecting our efforts towards what would be high impact. And we heard from a lot of faculty that I am so impacted by trying to change my whole class and change how I've been doing things for 40 or 20, 30 years in a classroom. How can I add one more thing? And so really, Shandra, and we are all asking, it's just this one more thing, one thing that you can do to actually try today to kind of keep up the good efforts that you already have in place, and really know that there is a team of folks here whose centralized effort is to support this good work. And that's what we really hope to see the Culture Lab pilot kind of continue on in a way to make sure that these resources are embedded and centralized and accessible. And, I do want to kind of pivot before we open up for questions. I don't want to miss the opportunity to share that we're going to keep the conversation going in a JTerm workshop. And it'll be a springboard. The handouts that you've seen are springboards for further conversation, a great set of curated readings, asynchronous resources, and a synchronous workshop. So if you want to be part of the inaugural Nextgen faculty support workshop, we will be hosting that in January, and you can sign up to be interested. And what we're going to do is try and figure out a time that works for the folks who are interested. So you don't have to worry about how this gets built into your schedule. We will do some of that legwork for you. So again, there are a lot of great resources. I want to open up for questions. I know we're a little bit over. So thank you so very much for your time. I want to say thank you to Shandra, Becca, and Danny for their incredible work. They are doctoral students making fabulous progress today degree and they're doing this work on the side because they believe in it and they know its impact. So I just want to say thank you to them. And if you see them around at other meetings, say thank you to them too. Thanks so much.
Very good. And thank you all. Thank you all for the resources that you're pointing to. Some of these have been publicized through the chat function. We'll also be sending them out again to everybody who registered for this webinar. So that includes the links, that includes the PDFs, and that will also, we hope, include answers to questions that we don't get to in the next 15 minutes because there's simply too many good questions. We're not going to get to them all, but we will get back to you as best we can as a follow-up, including a recording of this session. But let's jump in now with some of the questions. Some of these have been very much the what can we do? Some are really questions, where does this come from? So one question, for example, is next gen, the term, is it really understood that next gen also includes low income? Do you think there's a wide understanding of that? What are some common myths and misconceptions about this next gen low income term that should be dispelled?
It's a really great question. And where this term next gen came from, it started as a dinner series. And when we were thinking about when students are sitting at convocation, and it's a very contextualized term. Again, this term doesn't exist outside of Harvard. It was part of a team of folks who work here. So Sade Abraham, Daniel Lobo, who is an alumni of the college and was the former president of the First Generation Alumni Association, also assistant director at Career Service, and has done phenomenal work for first generation lower income students at Harvard, is now doing a PhD in sociology at UC Berkeley. So Dan, if you're watching, hey, we're giving him a shout out. When we were together kind of brainstorming, dreaming of this, we realized that there were so many shared challenges and overlapping needs for first generation, lower income, undocumented, documented TPS, and lower SES or low socioeconomic status international students across both the college and all 12 graduate schools. So where I sit in the Graduate Commons program. We work a lot with graduate students from all 12 schools. We're familiar with their student affairs team. So we were kind of centrally situated to say like, hey, this is actually true. This is what we're hearing from the students who live with us. And so what is the language that we need in order to advance these efforts? And Byron P. White is a chancellor at UNC, or assistant vice provost, I might get that wrong. And he talks about we need a new language. We need a different way of talking about these students that say, are you first gen, are you the FG, or are you the LI, right? Are you the low income person? And we need to think about this in a more holistic way, because actually next gen students come from all socioeconomic backgrounds. What we're doing is talking about a demographic that is diverse and dynamic, but that needs very similar centralized support systems, and that the definitions or the specifics of their affinity-based needs can be better addressed on a community and local level when we don't have to also build the tree trunk. If you think about our logo, right, as this which is a tree, right, like as this base support structure. So I hope, that gets the answer started. Danny, Shandra, Becca, feel free to add on.
Yeah, I was just going to tackle a tiny kind of similar part of that question, which is kind of what is the biggest misconception, perhaps not just about that term, but about next gen students. And I think this is just a great opportunity just to be super clear about this. I think the biggest misconception about next gen students is that they are not prepared for college. And we need to stop saying that. We need to stop talking about that they're not ready or that they're not prepared. First of all, because I think we would even struggle to be very clear about what we think college preparedness consists of, what sorts of mindset, skills, and experiences. I think if we created that list, we would see that our next gen students have many of those life experiences, skills, mindsets. What we need, I think, replace that with is that we need to understand that those students have had fewer practice reps at skills that other students have had access to due to the privilege of where they've grown up and the schools that they have attended. And so if we don't offer an opportunity to give them practice reps in the early parts of their college experience, then that's when we're reproducing inequity. And we're essentially confirming that they're not prepared because we haven't offered them the opportunity to show us what they can do. Because we're kind of just throwing them in and giving them no map or no support. So I think that's what we need to absolutely take out of our vocabulary. These students are prepared for college, but we need to support them.
So I was just going to say, and that's why when we hear the word first gen low income, we tend to associate a lot of these myths with. And so we're trying to change the vocabulary around next gen because the assets of that they bring.
Yeah, and I think another myth is that it squarely falls on minority students. There are students from all walks of life that fall under this category. And so that is white students, that is students of color, that is students with abilities, different abilities. I think that it is such a diverse group of folks that we run a risk when we try to, brush them with, whatever the saying is, try to categorize them in one bucket. I think that's dangerous to do. So just wanted to also elevate that.
Let's go back to high school. What can be done by high schools, the administrators, the teachers, the parents, to prepare smooth transition? I like the word transition of low-income and next-gen students into college life. So it's not just preparedness per se, but this transition that you're all describing. What can be done by high schools? Danny, let's start with you.
Yeah, I love that question. There's so much. I think one of the things that I've worked on a lot is establishing partnerships with local colleges and universities. Something like bringing an admissions officer to the campus, which a lot of schools do, but just creating that environment that allows a student to see themselves at that school and ask some personal questions, either one-on-one or in a small group setting. Also making sure that once a student gets to campus, there is a contact person that can support that student. I think oftentimes once a student gets to campus, they get thrown into the shuffle. So you have to go to this office to get this information. Then you have to go to another office, but that other office is telling you have to go to the other office. And at that point, a student gets frustrated, going into this space, believing that I don't belong here anyways. And this is confirmation. All of this, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know where to go. And so making sure that a school, a local, has a relationship with the schools the students are going into, and understand like, who is my contact person there? If something happens, or if a student has questions, who is that central person on campus that can let them know, you should actually talk to this person in this department. You should actually talk to that person in that department. Again, a lot of the work that we're doing, creating a centralized space for students to get their questions answered, is critical.
Let's transition from, we talked about the high school piece. Now let's talk about the recruiting piece. And this is not just for college, but even for the graduate schools. The question comes up, what can schools at all levels do to increase the pipeline of next-gen, underrepresented students, et cetera, throughout? What can we be doing?
Well, I can start with that question. I think that coming from an admissions background, I think one of the challenges is always bandwidth, right? We only had so many people on the team and we couldn't get to all places. And so we wound up having to make trade-offs about where we could go, how we got in front of students. What this moment, with this unfortunate COVID moment, might present to us in terms of insight and learning to take into the admissions process going forward, and recruiting process, is that we can get in front of students in different ways, potentially doing that in ways that don't always involve travel, and that allow us to go and find the talent where they are, because what has been proven time and again is that the talent exists. As Becca said, the students are not unprepared for college. There are other barriers and other challenges that might be hindering their access to an institution like a Harvard. They may not have as many people in their network who have a relationship with Harvard, or heaven forbid, be alumni themselves of Harvard. They may not have, as Becca said, the relations that they could call to talk through steps to attack large projects, the types of projects that put them on the radar for schools like a Harvard. But that means that we have an opportunity in the admissions process to leverage the technology, to leverage the tools at our disposal now that we're now all very comfortable with, to get in front of these students where they are. So those bright, incredible students in a remote rural area, or frankly in another area that may be more urban, but we have not gone to that school in a number of years. But when we look at all of the data that we look at in the admissions process to try to identify where students are, now we have an opportunity to get in front of them. And so I think it's about broadening who we think, or where we think the pool of talent exists. and then now using the tools that allow us to scale up our admissions and recruiting efforts to get in front of them. Because what we found all the time is that the theory tells us and the literature tells us that when we do the work as educators to help students not only recognize their skills that they already have, how those skills translate and connect to career opportunities, and how and where, and the tools to assess fit across institutions so that they can make informed decisions for themselves about the colleges they choose to enroll at, those students will do just that, and they'll make tremendous decisions. So now the work is on us to bring that information so that whether it's in high school, thinking about what opportunities do students have to do career exploration? What opportunities do we have to help students connect the skills they have to career options and to college fit? And then when we think about the admissions process, thinking about more broadly how we get in front of these students and where we get in front of students.
Becca, I want to let you go, and then I'll just chime in with a couple of Harvard examples.
Okay, great. Yeah, this kind of more generally. So once students are in, how do we keep them in the pipeline, especially in graduate school? But I think this absolutely applies for undergraduate as well, is that we need to build in courses that are all about teaching the how of graduate school. So how to succeed in clinicals, or I took the most amazing course at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It was so simple. It was called How to Write a Publishable Paper. And I got my first published paper out of it. But that we need to be taught the how of doing these things, because if we don't, those things remain hidden. And that's how the pipeline becomes leaky when students are figuring out, okay, I don't even know how to write a literature review, and I've got 3 due next week. So 1, building in courses that actually teach the hidden curriculum or the how of graduate school. And 2 is that we need, as colleges, to reward excellent mentors and advisors with tangible rewards, like course releases, like stipends, like formal awards and salary increases, because too often that work is invisible and it's done by women and women of color who are spending a lot of time with the Nextgen community, supporting them, encouraging them, and decoding the hidden curriculum. And then that is, because kind of it's a zero-sum game, taking away from their own research and productivity, which is the most highly rewarded aspect of academia. And Jessica Calarco describes this brilliantly in her book, How to A Field Guide to Grad School.
It's a great book. And these folks do amazing work every day, and they help promote awareness of this information, of how this impacts our experiences. I want to just quickly turn to some great Harvard examples. If you want to know how this work is being done really well, I want you to look at Alexa Stokes, the director of inclusion and belonging at the School of Engineering. I want to trace how she's worked with faculty, worked with staff across to promote on admissions and recruitment, and also even just building community around this demographic. She did a great first gen book club with the staff and the faculty. She's done a lot of great work for HILT at the at the conference this year. I also want to highlight Maritza Hernandez, who is the Associate Dean for Enrollment Services and Support Services at the Ed School, who's been doing this work across 3 graduate schools to increase underrepresented, underserved populations at both the Div School, the Kennedy School, and then the Graduate School of Education. And lastly, what we learned at our National First Gen event on this past Sunday is that timing is key. And what COVID has done for our first gen, our next gen students, both graduate and undergrad, is remove a critical component of the data that students absorb. So they are constantly looking at peers and asking questions in person and watching and following. What COVID has done, what Zoom has done, is taken away so much important data of the how, and we absolutely cannot wait to start explaining. So as you're leaving this session, I want you to encourage you to do what the ARC has done. The Academic Resource Center has created a whole list of what are the menu of options, and as staff, if you mentor someone who is a student, here's what you can tell them that the ARC can offer. That menu is critically important. So the good work is happening. We need to centralize it, and Nextgen is here to kind of help further this effort and help support the faculty and staff on campus. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Danny and Becca and Shandra. Thank you particularly for the resources that you've been providing both live and that you're pointing us to. And again, these will be distributed as a follow-up to this presentation. as well as answers to the questions that we just unfortunately don't have time for, but are really rich and exciting. And thanks also to all of you who have joined us today. We hope you'll log into future signature events, including next week's roundtable on the implications of the 2020 election, which is Tuesday the 17th, 5 o'clock to 6:30 p.m. Eastern will be that discussion. And information about these and other events, as well as recordings of past signature events, can be found at socializeremotely.harvard.edu. Please also visit hilt.harvard.edu for resources from our recent conference, very much including those on Nextgen.